The ANC's National Working Committee has tabled a report which raised concerns about the new Political Party Funding Act. That report says the legislation has reduced the ability of political parties to mobilize resources for their activities, including elections campaigns. The party proposes an amendment to this act to make declaring donations only necessary when amounts over 50 million rand are received. Currently, donations above 15 million must be declared. Civil society organizations have hit back at this proposal. In fact, they're accusing the ANC of weakening South Africa's democracy. For more on that reaction, let's bring in Robyn Pasensie, who is the political systems researcher at My Vote Counts. Robyn, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks very much indeed for making time. For those who are struggling to connect the dots, how does what the ANC is asking for translate into a weakening of South Africa's democracy?
First of all, good morning, and thank you for having me on the show. And I think that's an excellent question, because I think one can become bogged down in talking about that this is just the act that is about party funding. This is just about where you can get your donations from and how much that can be. But what we are really talking about is private influence in our politics, how political decision-making can be influenced by people who have lots of money. And that is something that we have seen quite often here in our country. And I think a few weeks ago, again, back in the spotlight with the publishing of the first part of the Zondo Commission report. And this is really what's at stake when we talk about the Political Party Funding Act. It's an act that's designed to keep our politics not only free and fair, but essentially out of the clutches of this kind of private interest. We've already seen in evidence given to the Commission, for example, that influence could be bought with less than 100,000 rand, which is currently the threshold for donation under the PPFA. And we are extremely concerned that if you are going to increase threshold amounts for donations above 100,000 rand, the current amount that we are hearing is somewhere between 250,000 and 500,000 rand. That is a concern. Now we are talking about possibly having donors who are pumping in large amounts of money to your political party. And now we must ask the question, are they buying influence in your policy making, in your decision making? And that's really the effect that it has on our democracy. And that's really the crux of our concern.
Yeah. Among the questions I imagine will be ventilated now is what informs what the threshold should be. You've answered this, I guess, in some respects already, but, a large sum of amount of money is different for an ANC, which has been around for more than 100 years, versus an Action SA, which is yet, I think, to mark even their 5 years.
No, absolutely. And I think the Act was trying to do was not trying to place sort of strictures on getting party financing that was going to make it difficult for parties to operate. And parties like the ANC, of course, are massive. They have a large amount of staff. They have a lot of operational costs that need to come into play. And the issue here is that we're not saying that you can only source 100,000 rand in total. It's that should this come from one particular donor, all you have to do is disclose that, declare that, and say, yes, we received this kind of money. And the threshold amounts were negotiated amounts when this act was being drafted. And just to that point, most parties were in agreement that the threshold amounts were not only necessary, but they agreed to the 100,000. And they said that this was a good amount. I think, in fact, in those public hearings, the DA singled out and said that it is large amounts of money that are cause for concern when it comes to buying influence. So the 100,000 was really a compromise and negotiated amount. So that's also a point that we are a bit confused about when parties were quite happy with that to begin with.
Of course, the well-rehearsed retort from some parties who are against this act is that if there is a disincentive for donors to contribute money, political parties won't have an ability to, I guess, do their work, and that too has an adverse effect on the country's democracy. What's your response to that line of logic?
Well, I mean, look, this is an entirely new phase that we are entering. So one would imagine there would be some growing pains. There could be some donors who would not like this new way of operating, and so they may choose to withhold their donations. but that doesn't mean that you can't source donations at all. And again, all this process is really about is to keep our politics transparent, to make sure that you are doing your job the way you are supposed to. So really the onus is on you to approach those kind of donors, business people who would be in line with that. And I think some parties, I think here particularly the ANC, have touted this line as being part of their financial woes, for example, not being able to pay their staff. But their financial woes or mismanagement has been around well before the implementation of the PPFA. So I think for some political parties to use that line that you just mentioned would just be scapegoating the Act here. The Act doesn't stop you from getting donations. It's merely asking you to be truthful as to where those donations come from, and once they reach a certain amount, to make that public. And I should also mention here as well, the Act also makes provision for the Multi-Party Democracy Fund, where the public is encouraged to make donations to, but also any other business or entity. And from that fund, it is dispersed amongst all political parties. So you could also just put it in there if you were afraid of having your name associated with a particular political party.
Yeah, the first couple of declarations have already taken place. Very quickly then, Robyn, what, if anything, are we able to read about who's funding our political parties in South Africa?
At the moment, I think we can't read too much into it. We've only had 2 disclosures so far. The third disclosure will probably take place somewhere around February. What we can see, I think, is that only a few political parties have actually made disclosures so far. Not all of the major political parties have done so. I think most notably political parties such as the EFF, the IFP. We haven't seen any donations from them. And what is of particular concern here is that with the second set of disclosures, that was also in the run-up to the local government elections in November. So we would have expected to see more political parties actually coming out and obviously disclosing their donations, in particular the in-kind donations. But I think we will really be reserving most of our comment and assessment for the end-of-year financial reports that political parties need to submit to the IEC as well. And I think there we will really be able to make a better judgment as to the kind of money flows that we see in our political parties.
Robyn Pasensie is a political systems researcher at My Vote Counts. Robyn, once again, thanks very much indeed for your time.